Good morning. This is Mary Haag. As Austin said, President and CEO of Prevention First. We're happy to be back with you again for this webinar, another opportunity to help with coalition development for the Suicide Prevention Coalitions.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Schiesler, Vice President of Coalition Strategies at Prevention First. Today, if you look at this next slide, what we're going to be covering today is steps for planning evaluation of coalition activities, strategies for ensuring high quality evaluation is implemented, tips on how to use evaluation results to improve coalition activities. We've come up with a couple action steps that we feel you should be able to do, and we'll go over theirs at the end. And then we provided a slide with resources, some of the things that we used to put this presentation together. And then the last slide, second to last slide of this presentation is our contact information, and then we'll have Austin close us out after that.
So for those of you not familiar with us, Prevention First used to be the Coalition for a Drug-Free Greater Cincinnati, and we were founded in 1996 by Senator Rob Portman. At that time, he was a U.S. representative, as a comprehensive effort to address youth substance use and misuse. Prevention First, our new branded name, serves the population of the tri-state region where Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky come together there along the Ohio River. This combined metro region of about 2 million people encompasses urban, suburban, and rural communities. We are focused on the prevention of substance use and misuse, as well as mental health promotion and problem gambling prevention. We bring all parts of the community together. Prevention is a comprehensive multi-system set of individual environmental approaches that maximize wellness and preclude or delay the onset of health and safety problems. Our mission is to promote healthy behaviors by sparking and sustaining community change. Prevention First's overarching goals are that more communities are engaged in prevention and more people are making healthy choices. Our work is comprised of a multifaceted set of programs, policies, and best practices designed to engage all parts of society. The coalition model that you guys are all involved in as well has been proven to create more long-term sustainable change than any single strategy or program could do alone. We do our work at a population level, taking a comprehensive public health approach to promote mental wellness and prevent substance misuse across the lifespan. Our vision is that people make healthy choices in every stage of life. That's me. So we believe that this is our theory of change, that if we create communities that can solve drug problems and we change the conditions that make drug use more likely, we will reduce drug use. And this, a similar kind of theory of change could be put in place for suicide prevention. First, we are invested in prevention science. We are well recognized for our student drug use survey and our coalition evaluation center. This work helps us to raise the community's awareness of the problem. It helps us and our partners to target our efforts and use our resources wisely. And through our metrics and evaluation, we are demonstrating outcomes. In fact, this year we do have one question on our student drug use survey related to thinking about suicide, and we will be piloting some new social emotional data indicators in this next survey cycle, which will begin in the fall of 2019. The next thing we do is build community capacity. There are over 30 neighborhood level coalitions down in our region and groups that we have helped to start or are helping to sustain. In addition, multiple community sectors, we educate those groups on effective prevention strategies so that our community is prepared to engage in prevention. Again, some of these are suicide prevention coalitions as well. And lastly, there are many risk factors that we can mitigate and protective factors that we can enhance to prevent substance misuse and the likely consequences. There is no silver bullet, but by working at a community level and a systems level, we can and we do see changed behavior and better health. Many of these risk and protective factors are common with other risky behaviors, such as for suicide prevention.
So this is Mary and I's third opportunity being able to speak with the Suicide Prevention Coalitions. So hopefully if some of you have been with us through the in-person trainings in our first webinar, this particular model may look familiar to you. At Prevention First, we follow the SPIF, also known as the Strategic Prevention Framework, which allows our work to be designed by a planning framework, taking the work of the coalition from assessment to evaluation. So when you're looking at the flower, as we call it, it goes assessment to capacity to planning to implementation, evaluation, and then in the middle is sustainability and cultural competence. And the reason that those are in the middle is those are two parts of the planning process that never go away. They're always in each and every step and should be considered. Today, we will focus on the types of data you're collecting and follow it through to evaluation. When we refer to begin with the end in mind, we are looking at this process. So you might ask your coalition members, what is our ultimate goal, and then work backwards. The planning process allows you to lead by fact, not emotion. A logical plan taking the coalition from assessment to action to quality outcomes. So here on this slide are the first three parts of the Strategic Prevention Framework. The first section is assessment. During this phase, community members are collecting data to define problems, looking at resources, where there are resources, where there are not resources. Perhaps you're looking at community readiness within a community, how ready a community is to hear a particular message. And then from there, what can we do to address the needs and gaps? At the same time, as you're moving into the next level, or next step, you're looking at capacity. So what do we have to do to mobilize and or build community capacity within a community? Perhaps when you're looking at your data, it appears to be that individuals in the community are not familiar with the suicide problem in the community. So there's that level of capacity building that needs to be done to even bring the message forward. Then the next phase goes into planning. So coalition would develop a strategic plan that includes policies, programs, and practices, creating a logical, data-driven plan. The next step is implementation, looking at implementing evidence-based prevention programs, policies, and practices. This is actually where you are implementing strategies and activities into the community. And then evaluation, so measuring the impact of what the coalition is carrying out with programs, policies, and practices. Now, of course, evaluation is the last step, but what we wanted to emphasize in this particular presentation is that if you don't think about what you want to accomplish in the end, then it's less effective. So thinking about evaluation before you even begin assessment is really kind of a in tandem process. And then, as I mentioned, the two overarching concepts that are incorporated into each of the steps are cultural competency and sustainability. So sustainability could be defined as, what do we want to sustain in this process? Oftentimes, groups get focused on what the grant or what their source of funding is asking, when in reality, what do you want to sustain? You want to sustain the mission of your coalition. And then cultural competence, particularly with the topic of suicide, what are people aware of? What are some of the things culturally that you have to take into consideration? So first we will look at the steps for planning evaluation of coalition activities. What I'd like to do is walk you through, for the next several slides, is what we would call defining a problem statement, and then looking at what's the data supporting that, and then walking through towards the end towards outcomes. So when you define a problem statement, you collect data to define problems, resources, readiness within a community to address needs and gaps. That's how the assessment phase was defined in the Strategic Prevention Framework. So bringing our coalition together to discuss these important questions will allow members to focus on fact and sustainability. So maybe an example of a problem statement could be young people in XYZ community are completing suicide at a rate much higher than the state average. So have you ever asked your coalition, do you collect data? What types of data do you collect? Who cares about your data? Anybody? Why should they care? So this is looking at partners and how you might engage them around the table. And then what do you do with your data? So keeping in mind an effective coalition will always evaluate activities that can be linked to a logic model or a plan of action, and that has data that has been collected from multiple sources. So look at the quote unquote end of what you want to accomplish and work backwards. So what are the risk and protective factor data that will decrease suicide rates? What are your sources of data? Student drug use data, survey at a community forum, community and state completion rates. So what I did here was just mocked up some of the things that could be an outcome or what you want to accomplish at the end of this particular logic model. Perhaps it's a year-long logic model. So increase the amount of young people that report having a trusted adult to talk to, increase the amount of young people who report healthy sleeping habits, decrease the amount of young people who experience stress on a frequent basis, and increase participant knowledge on the topic of mental health. So all of these when looking at mental well-being could contribute to someone being healthier mentally, which overall could then contribute to a decrease in suicide. So we'll kind of walk through that process, but right away, we've already decided at the end of this time, this is what we want to accomplish. So what could be your measurements for success? So these particular bullet points match up with the bullet points on the previous slide. Young people in our community have at least one trusted adult to talk to. Young people in our community report getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Young people in our community report a low percentage of experiencing stress, and the coalition will host 3 community forums to educate the community on risk and protective factors for mental health. So if you know this is what you want to accomplish, then your plan for activities could focus around the following: education for adults in the community on how to be a trusted adult, activities and messaging focused on getting more sleep and the role it plays in mental health, stress reduction activities across the curriculum, perhaps in school and the community, and planning and designing 3 forums in the community for both adults and young people to attend. The agenda could be based around the risk factors for suicide, but also focus on what protects young people. What we're trying to focus on is not admiring the problem, staying solution focused. Design a training evaluation that shows how knowledge was gained. And we'll talk a little bit about that on a couple slides. So give examples of what the training evaluation could look like prior to this forum is I was informed of proper sleeping. And so you want to look at, it's not necessarily that you have to do a pre and post test, but oftentimes what we do as an organization is we will put one statement about I was informed of proper sleeping habits, and then prior to this forum, and then they rate themselves 1 to 5. Following this forum, rate themselves to 1 to 5. And then you can actually see how much information, knowledge was gained in that time period. So you're not doing a pre and post and having to worry about matching people up. What you're doing is you're allowing to see on paper how they increase their knowledge. So maybe they were a 1 on the importance of sleep when they came into the forum, and then when they left, they were a 5. So that's as an opportunity to show that you made success in increasing knowledge. Strategies for ensuring high quality evaluation is implemented. So the problem statement is now clear. We've assessed our data and we've looked and did a problem analysis. So your coalition has come up with this problem statement. Young people in XYZ community are completing suicide at a rate much higher than the state average. So be clear with coalition members that you must be able to answer, how do you know? So if you're going to definitively say that this is your problem statement, how do you know that they're completing suicides at a much higher rate than the state? So pick 2 data sources that drive this statement. You know in your community how many suicides have been completed, and then you can get state data that says how many have been completed in the state of Ohio. So how will you plan to change the XYZ numbers? And really, you can never have too much data if it's effective in sharing your story and message. The problem statement is effective in that it answers the target population, defined separately as youth ages 12 to 18. Your community is defined because you've said XYZ community, and then eventually you will identify the data sources that will be tracked for measurement. So any statement that you make, you should be able to back up with data. Strategies for ensuring high quality evaluation is implemented. We always say in our office, plan the work and work the plan. So what does this mean? If you look at your root cause data collection, so what is driving, or what your data is showing that is driving these suicide completions in their community? You could ask yourselves, why are young people completing suicide? Look at the individual and environmental factors that can be contributing. What can XYZ population feasibly do, and what strategies will we implement? Our pretend example tells us that young people need to be educated on what keeps them well. So perhaps they need more sleep. They're experiencing high levels of stress, and they're not reporting that they have a trusted adult to speak to, or a peer as well. The community data tells us that adults and young people need more education on the risk and protective factors for mental well-being. So what are our activities, and how do we know they're working? So it's clearly defining what you're going to be doing, what's the strategy, what's the activity, and then what's our metric. How do you know that this is working? So anytime that you're saying that you're going to do a particular example, you need to have a plan with how you'll measure that and what that could look like in contributing towards your outcomes. Next slide, please. Thank you. Strategies for ensuring high quality evaluation is implemented. So a couple examples. When you're looking at activity and evaluation planning, look at the data the coalition wants to have an impact on. Develop an action plan for tracking accomplishments, design activities in the community to follow the plan. So anything that you're going to be planning has to be data-driven, as well as you need to be able to show how you measured this. So what are the activities that will be designed for sleep, stress reduction, and increasing adult interaction? So I've taken the top 3 things that this coalition should be working on based on your problem statement. So some of the things that you're going to want to track are the number of individuals who attended, messaging that went to a target audience, evaluating every activity for knowledge gained. So you'll notice in these activities that we are building up to the problem statement that will eventually lead to the outcomes. So not any point in time are we measuring ourselves based on the amount of suicide. We're never really talking about suicide in these evaluations. We're looking at the risk and protective factors for what we know prevent the community from suicide. So it's something to keep in mind, because you can look at all different levels of accomplishments around this particular problem. So tips on how to use evaluation results to improve coalition activities. You want to be able to measure the coalition impact. So you're keeping track of how many people you are serving and what could that look like. Perhaps you are keeping track of media messaging. So how many impressions have seen your media messaging. This could be an example of perhaps you choose a campaign on better sleep in your community, and you want to purchase some movie theater ads that have this message. So all of those type of messagings, when you're purchasing them, or even when you're tracking from normal television or radio or newspaper data, they all will have an opportunity to share impression numbers with you. So they should be able to tell you that at any given time, in this particular instance, 8,000 people saw your message. So these are the type of things that you want to keep track of. And then when you're thinking about your community forums, you're going to be looking at how many people were there. So how many people did that service provide? Was there any level of a new partnership? Perhaps some decisions were made to do a new program, practice, policy. What was the level of community change around those forums? And then you also have the data to show how your knowledge was increased through the education given at the community forums. So demonstrate your progress, track the coalition's presence in the community, share the data, bring partners to the table who care about this topic. So a lot of people can maybe want to run when they hear the word data. So there's lots of way that you can keep track of things to lead to your outcomes. So how many times were you out in the community presenting something? So it's not just the number of community forums, but it's the number of instances that you did things in the community. Anytime you're out in the community, you want to keep track of what you're doing, what your message is, and how it's contributing to your outcomes. Share your data, all the information that you're gathering, all the different data sources that are coming from your problem statement. These are things that people want to know, because you might think that this person, it's not valuable to them, but it very much could be, because that could bring another partner to the table. And you always want to ask yourself, who cares about this data? So there might be partners out there when you're thinking about the coalition model or the sectors of the community. How are you involving each of those sectors to know and understand what you care about and why they should care about it? So local businesses, why should a local business be concerned with some of the things that you're discussing? And this is what the work of a coalition does, is it convenes around these topics so that you can demonstrate the progress that you're doing in the community. Connecting your work to outcomes. Each report given to the community should utilize language of how the coalition is working towards the outcome of reduced suicides. Longitudinal growth, so tracking how the coalition will show capacity growth. So you need to report on things that are even the smallest of accomplishments in your eyes. Anytime you bring a new partner to the table, anytime that you are attending trainings as a coalition, anytime you're reaching out to other organizations and receiving technical assistance. Let's say that you see this presentation, you think it's amazing, and you want to follow up with Mary or I to receive further technical assistance on some of these topics. That's an example of internal growth. So you have the trainings that you're attending, you have the technical assistance that you're receiving. So how is your coalition building capacity across time to know and understand coalition development, coalition evaluation, and what is the level of organizational change? Some of the past presentations that we've done have focused on coalition development. It's also focused on the business of coalitions. So it's extremely important to not only track what you're doing within the community, but also what you're doing internally as an organization to grow your coalition. So tips on how to use evaluations results to improve coalition activities. We always emphasize to people to use and share your data. So how are you using and sharing the data? You as a coalition have the opportunity to guide the story of your coalition with facts. Let your story be one that you tell. Do not let the media tell your story or other partners in the community tell your story. Much like what we focus on, suicide, the topic you're focusing on is very sensitive. People bring a lot of emotion to the table around it, as well they should. But your job as a coalition is to stay fact-based and focus on the activities and the outcomes that you want to achieve. So present this information in a way that delivers what the protective factors are for mental well-being. So you're talking about sleep, you're talking about stress reduction, you're talking about other caring adults. Explain that the focus of the coalition is to increase protection to reduce risk. We're going to do as much protection in this community to protect our young people so that we reduce the risk of them thinking about suicide, attempting suicide, and of course, completing suicide. So if your coalition does not have a theory of change, perhaps this is something that you can work on as well. So a theory of change statement, also called an if-then statement, can assist in delivering a message. If we focus on activities that increase mental well-being in our community, then we will see a decrease in completed suicides. So it gives us the opportunity to say that we're going to focus on activities that have a purpose and an outcome. and really that are centered around increasing mental well-being in our community. Alternatively, when we follow the process and we assess, we build our capacity, we plan, we implement and evaluate, we can say that the activities that we have been performing in the community across said amount of time has contributed to decreasing completed suicides in community XYZ. So tips on how to use evaluation results to improve coalition activities. I've said this earlier, but share all the work of the coalition internally. You want to look at trainings, technical assistance, coalition meetings, important organizational changes. As a coalition here at Prevention First, we track everything. We meet monthly and we look at the information that we've accomplished throughout the course of the month, which then leads to quarterly accomplishments, which then leads to our annual accomplishments. So anytime a staff attends a training, it's tracked with how many people from the coalition attended, how many hours we were there, and then what was the purpose of the training. Technical assistance, like I indicated earlier, that's where you're receiving information. So oftentimes, you know, this field of prevention is constantly growing. More science is added day by day. So it's just oftentimes we need technical assistance. What organizations are your go-to to receive this information? Coalition meetings, we track just about every coalition meeting we have. By that, I mean, if you're looking at your organizational chart of whoever the leader is, in our case, it's president and CEO. And then we track down all of our board of trustee meetings, all the board committee meetings, and then we go down into the action piece of that. So we really only track meetings that are on our infrastructure. If you tracked every single meeting, you would get quickly burnt out. So we look at those meetings that we're required to have, and then what was the outcome based on that.
What I was going to add here was that, of course, we utilize an online system for this, but it's also available to track by paper. Mm-hmm. And one of the important questions to ask yourself after you've entered in, you know, kind of the what and all of those other questions that Nicole was pointing to, the next piece of that is to ask yourself, why was this important? You know, why did we do this? Why? The why question would be, so what? Answering the question of so what?
Because ultimately that so what question should be identifying what, you know, what did we accomplish as part of this? Because a lot of times, even we were having some discussion about some of the activities we had done in the previous month earlier last week. And it was just a question about something we had done in the community. And so an example could be Prevention First hosted a community forum in the community of Avondale. Okay, so I know what that means. I know where I went, but it doesn't tell anything about why it was important. So you always have to back up, like what Mary said, is you should be consistently asking yourself the so what aspect of this. If it's something that we value and it's something that we did, why was it important? So as you track these accomplishments, what happened, who was involved, when was this, where was this, how long, how many people? So as you can see, you're kind of building your case here. You are reporting all elements of something that you feel was valuable for the coalition to accomplish. And you're also listing partners. It's important to remember when it was, where it was, what community you were serving. I know the particular example that we have is in the community XYZ. So how is that defined? Perhaps it's the neighborhood, perhaps it's the county. In our case, we serve a region. So we have to be very clear about where we were, when we were doing this, because trust me, you think that you'll remember and you don't. So it can get very confusing. So when you're looking at these, you're thinking about things that are internally and externally, as noted on this slide. What are you trying to strengthen your coalition, and what are you doing to improve your community? And you have to be flexible and redirect as needed. You all have action plans. But what the action plans allow you to do is say, this really isn't working. It really is looking at how we are accomplishing things, but it might not be directed at the outcomes that we want to accomplish. Perhaps once you got into the community and you localized it, then it changed the direction.
The other thing I would add here is also in our case, when we're looking at this type of evaluation, it's scored and reviewed by outside evaluators. And so you have to remember that's why all of these little details, or part of why all of those little details are important, is because think of it as if this information, when you get it into a report, et cetera, some people who won't know you as well will want more, need to be able to understand whatever it is you're talking about. So the more information you can put into that entry, then the more outside people will understand what it is you do.
And across time, when you are tracking these changes, it's going to ultimately show a collection of things that you've accomplished. So looking at that second piece there externally, so sharing all the work of the coalition, you're looking at how you're interacting with individuals. So how are you providing services? What is your level of community change? Are you actually accomplishing new policies, practices, programs, partnerships? The media piece is that impression thing that I spoke of earlier. And then resources generated. So how are you generating resources for the community and for the coalition? So for the coalition, that could be cash resources. So what types of grants are you bringing in? It can also be in kind. So a lot of times in the nonprofit world, if you are writing grants, you have to show a match perhaps, or you have to show how you're generating resources. So maybe where you meet monthly is a donated space. So if they were to charge for that space, maybe it would be $200 per meeting. So that's an in-kind resource. And the reason we bring all of this up is that these are effective things that a coalition should be doing. So when a coalition is functioning as it should, you are creating community change, you are providing services, you are putting awareness out there via media, and you're generating resources. So that's earlier when Mary was discussing, what a coalition is, that it's a single strategy that is more effective than a single strategy or program because of these very things. This is how you look at and know that your coalition is accomplishing things. And then there is the internal piece that I spoke of earlier, tracking the trainings, technical assistance, because you put a lot of time and energy into the staff or your volunteers. So if I were to need to justify why we have this number of positions that we do, or why I'm writing 4 people into this grant, I can refer back to and say, well, we have this many staff members who do these amount of tasks, and this is how much professional development they need per year to perhaps maintain their certification or just stay current. So these are all really important things that you need to keep track of as a coalition, because it will ultimately show how you are achieving your outcomes. So an example of how you would report all of this that we just talked about is you have to know your audience or choose your audience. So when you report to audiences, an example of how you could share this information is throughout the year, we have hosted 12 coalition meetings, which are focused on how the coalition can reduce the number of completed suicides in XYZ County. The data reports that XYZ community is reporting completed suicides in youth ages 12 to 18 at a higher rate than the state average. Our main area of focus are increasing sleep practices of youth ages 12 to 18, educating on stress management, increasing the confidence of young people to reach out to a trusted adult, and hosting 3 community forums for adults and young people. We served 550 adults and youth through events dedicated to suicide prevention, reported over 1 million media impressions, and provided 100 professional development hours to coalition staff to stay up to date on current trends. And then finished strongly with Prevention Works. So to break this down, what is effective about this statement? You have a clear problem statement on what the coalition is doing and what you are working on. You've identified an area of focus. It is clear that data is being collected through, I mentioned a media tracking with the impressions. I mentioned how many individuals were served through provided services. And also, you could add in here that we served 550 adults and youth across 12 events dedicated to suicide prevention. So you could put the number of instances, which could break down to once a month or a couple times a month, however you choose to look at it. So what is intentionally not the message here when I'm reporting on these statistics that we have gathered through data collection? I have not mentioned the number of suicides. I have not admired the problem here. I've just said that we have here in our community a higher amount of completed suicides than they do at the state average. I'm not giving any details on those suicides, and I'm not providing any scare tactics as to what you should and should not do in regards to suicide prevention, or scare tactics to that particular audience. So what this allows us to do is understand what puts young people at risk for suicide, but then we're also talking about what we've done to protect them. What we've instilled in the community to better understand community well-being, mental health well-being.
So I wanted to offer up that we do have a couple of templates that if you would like us to send those over, Austin, we can do it. One is a template of the logic model so that you can see where your problem analysis in the beginning under assessment directly relates to your evaluation and outcomes at the end of the logic model. So there's that piece. We also have paper templates for tracking your activity and your accomplishments. Can be done, I think, is it in Excel or Word? I don't remember.
I think it's just in Word. It's in Word.
So anyway, or if you're really interested and have the capacity for tracking these at a higher level, we could talk with you about coming into our evaluation system. It's a web-based evaluation system. And then lastly, I wanted to point out, I kind of always my go-to resource is Community Toolbox at the University of Kansas. They are actually the people behind our online evaluation system as well. But anyway, if you've not ever used the Community Toolbox at the University of Kansas, it's been around for 20, 25 years, maybe longer, I don't know, but they keep it up to date all of the time, and it is just a lot of information, and it's broken out by different steps and activities that any type of community collaborative. You could be a nutrition coalition, you could be a cardiovascular coalition, it doesn't matter. All of their information is research-based and applies to any type of community-based collaborative and community-based prevention. So visit that when you have an opportunity. I've been using it for like 25 years, so I cut my teeth on Community Toolbox, but it's just a fabulous resource for anybody. The next two links will take you to the primers that from CADCA, which is Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. And actually, again, this is following the SPIF process. The Strategic Prevention Framework is a SAMHSA evidence-based, community-based planning process. And so these primers, there's a set of 5, 6, 7 of them that align with the Strategic Prevention Framework. These two that were, directly relate to what we've been talking about today, assessment and evaluation, and how those two connect. So I think that was it on that.
So you can feel free to visit those websites. We've left about 15 minutes for questions. So let's have some interaction time. What are people thinking? What are your questions? And how can we help?
And feel free to type out in the chat box and I will relay that out loud to the rest of the attendees. While people are typing, I'm just gonna say that I will send out all the slides, everybody, along with those resources that Mary and Nicole just talked about. Well, I will keep the chat box open, but Mary and Nicole, if you want to move on to this while people are typing out their responses.
Okay. So as a result of this webinar, some of the things that we discussed are utilizing the information given to develop a problem statement and identify data sources. Create a logic model that identifies outcomes and how the coalition will track and attain the outcomes. If you look at the CADCA primers, specifically the assessment primer, the one that we just talked about on that resources page, that you can see the model of logic model that they use. These are of course focused on drug prevention, but you can easily see that you can do any type of health or social issue into these. Actually, when we train on the strategic prevention framework, we will walk audiences through different examples of what they can actually spiff. So the spiff can be a verb, it can be a noun, but oftentimes it's like, well, let's look at buying a car, or let's look at buying a house or going on vacation. What do you have to do? You have to assess the information, build the capacity, plan, implement, evaluate. So you can see that once you're into these and you're reading them, if you're interested, it really gives you a nice framework to plan just about everything. We recommend that you develop a data committee that's dedicated to identifying data sources and staying current on trends. So of course, not knowing how big your coalitions are, perhaps this is just part of your coalition, but oftentimes coalitions will have a separate group that just looks at the data, what type of data sources is coming in, what type of trends are we seeing in the community. So right now I can tell you that we have a data committee that focuses on, number one is our student drug use survey. So not only what the data is saying, but the whole process of the data collection. That is our number one source for quantitative information, which is numeric data. And then we also host listening sessions because specifically on a lot of these items, you can't ask why. Why are young people, engaging in this unhealthy behavior, whether it's substance use or, thinking about suicide, the mental illness piece of it. So listening sessions really give you some nice data as to asking questions that maybe you can't ask on a survey. We consider evaluations at events as data that we can use. So there's all different kinds of things that a coalition can use to inform their work. The last part then is solidifying a process for tracking accomplishments. So we gave you a lot of information on what you can track. We'll send some of those follow-up tools that Mary discussed, as well as the community toolbox is an excellent resource to look at some of this information. But we cannot emphasize enough that make sure everything you do is tracked. Never host a meeting or a training without tracking that it occurred. Because ultimately, in the end, people are investing their time and their money into your coalition. You're going to have to report to funders. You're going to have to acknowledge partners. So it's a constant case for why you exist. I've been in the field long enough to know that, we used to report and say, well, how many people were there? 5. Were they happy with it? Yes. Okay. And that was what we sent off to the state as an accomplishment. So we've come a long way in how we're able to report some of this information, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to track that, because also it's providing a history of your work. So if you have a change in leadership or positions, tracking all this information can show what that position was responsible for, how much professional development they received, and ultimately, what is the value of their position? What are they contributing? Well, they're contributing services in the community and generating resources. So it all links back up to your overall mission and vision, but as well as showing progress on your on your problem statement.
All right, well, it doesn't look like there are any questions. So here is Mary and Nicole's contact information. I'm sure they don't mind if you reach out with any questions after today's presentation. But again, thank you all for coming out today, spending your lunch with us. And thank you again, Mary and Nicole, for a wonderful presentation as always.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Austin. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.